So my role is to discuss a review of diabetic retinopathy clinical research network trials. And I do not have any financial interest in the topic of this talk. The DRCR.net, or Diabetic Retinopathy Clinical Research Network, is a group of physicians that got together and supported by National Institute of Health and other organizations to conduct multi-center trials on diabetic retinopathy and macular edema. Currently, there are 139 active sites with over 400 investigators throughout the United States and Canada. The trial started with letter A, then B, C, and then it reached Z, so it started with AA, AB, and so on. There are over 30 clinical trials with interesting results. In the next 5 minutes, I try to give you some highlights of those 30 trials. The result that I would highlight would be in red color here. Protocol B showed that over a 2-year period, focal and grid photocoagulation is more effective than intravitreal triamcinolone. Protocol I showed that intravitreal ranibizumab, also known as Lucentis, with prompt or deferred laser is more effective than focal and grid laser alone. And Protocol J showed that in the additional 1 intravitreal triamcinolone or 2 intravitreal ranibizumab injection in eyes that are receiving focal and grid laser for DME and panretinal photocoagulation is associated with a better visual outcome. And Protocol S showed that ranibizumab injections are effective in treating proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Some of these may not be a surprise to you, but at least now we have a solid evidence for this. Protocol C showed that although on average there are slight decreases in retinal thickening during the day, most eyes with diabetes do not change that much in retinal thickness throughout the day. And Protocol O showed that the mean central subfield threshold, the macular thickness, is 70 micron thicker when it's measured with Heidelberg Spectralis compared to the Zeiss Stratus OCT. So we can't really compare that number from one machine to the other machine unless we adjust for those 70 microns. Let's look at a couple of recently published results. Protocol T was significant because it was a head-to-head study of comparing aflibercept, Eylea, with bevacizumab or Avastin, and ranibizumab or Lucentis for diabetic macular edema. The primary outcome of the study was to compare aflibercept versus bevacizumab, aflibercept versus ranibizumab, and bevacizumab versus ranibizumab. The conclusion of the study, head-to-head study of those 3 anti-VEGF medications, was vision gains at 3 years were seen in all 3 of those medications. And among the eyes with better visual acuity, means better than 20/50, there was no significant difference in 2-year vision outcome between those 3 medications. However, among the eyes with poor visual acuity or worse visual acuity, means 20/50 or worse, aflibercept on average had superior 2-year visual outcome compared to bevacizumab or Avastin. Although the difference in 1 year was more significant, but still in year 2 remained significant. The visual acuity difference between aflibercept and ranibizumab that was noted at first year had decreased in the second year. Another study was Protocol S, which is notable because it compared panretinal photocoagulation, PRP, with ranibizumab for treatment of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The primary question of this study was to compare the PRP with ranibizumab and see if the vision is not worse in ranibizumab compared to PRP, and also to check if there are advantages, for example, vision throughout the follow-up study, or peripheral vision, or macular edema, or incidence of vitrectomy. The conclusion of the study was ranibizumab injection for proliferative diabetic retinopathy is not worse than PRP. And there was superior vision over the course of the 2-year study. It reduced ranibizumab reduced the incidence of diabetic macular edema. With ranibizumab, there was less peripheral visual field loss, there was fewer vitrectomy, and there was no major safety differences between PRP and ranibizumab, except for one endophthalmitis in ranibizumab group. So in conclusion, PRP has been effective for treatment of PDR for last 4 decades and it still remains effective in 21st century. Ranibizumab for proliferative diabetic retinopathy is at least as good as pan-retinal photocoagulation for visual acuity in 2 years. There was no substantial safety issues with ranibizumab. Ranibizumab may be preferred in the eyes that in addition to PDR has diabetic macular edema. And one thing that we need to pay attention is patients who we are following in the clinic, they are not study patients. So when we are using ranibizumab, we need to make sure that they come for follow-up. If patient is unreliable and we start treating proliferative diabetic retinopathy with ranibizumab and patient does not show up later, the disease will progress. In those type of patient, unreliable patient, still PRP is more definitive treatment. Thank you.
What is really interesting to me is the Protocol S, because this is actually one of the revolutionary,
yes.
Which is going to change a lot of our current practice.
Yes.
A question to the audience and to the panel. Who would carry on and actually follow the Protocol S and inject anti-VEGFs to a patient who you were scheduling for photocoagulation?
I think we need to do it 2 ways. One is to a patient, an average patient, because we know most of average patients will not come back. The second one, to say as a retinal surgeon, who you are reliable, you come back what you want for your own eye. Because that would be different when you have a very knowledgeable person who will be following up. Then you may be doing it different.
Just one thing which was not mentioned here. How many injections were involved in this Protocol S?
So generally,
During
the first year there were a larger number, and the second year there was less. And then the study shows actually that over time you need less and less of injection. That's one thing. And the other thing, which is not usually shown in the studies as much, is as soon as you start injecting in somebody's eye, they would have a better control of diabetes. And that better control of diabetes means better control of the disease.
Thank you.
You know, if somebody comes with needle to my eye, I would be very careful in what I eat.